buying hundreds of thousands of guns. That was in 1996 when more than 640,000 guns were bought back and destroyed. And it wasn't just for automatic weapons, it was for semi-automatic and pump-action shotguns and rifles. And it wasn't a voluntary program because the guns were all registered. If you failed to join in the buyback, you risked being thrown in jail for possessing an illegal weapon. The first few years after the buyback, gun deaths went down. Overall homicides went up. There have been no mass shootings since 1996, but gun ownership in Australia is now believed to be the same or higher than it was before the buyback. The National Rifle Association said this about Clinton's comment, quoting again, "This validates what the NRA has said all along. The real goal of gun control supporters is gun confiscation. Hillary Clinton's extreme views are completely out of touch with the American people." Megan.
Trace, thank you. Well, back in October of 1991, a gunman crashed his pickup truck through the window of a popular Texas restaurant and killed 24 people inside in what was described by witnesses as a, quote, methodical rampage that lasted 15 minutes. It only stopped when the gunman killed himself after being wounded by police. My guest now, Susanna Hupp, survived one of America's worst mass shootings, and she's a former Republican member of the Texas House of Representatives, where she served for 10 years. Susanna, great to see you again, and I know you lost both of your parents that day in that horrible massacre, and you yourself were carried a gun, and you used to carry it with you all the time, but not at that moment.
Well, not at that moment, because at that time in the state of Texas, it was actually illegal to carry. I was convinced to carry by an assistant DA in the Houston area. But you're right. I made a stupid decision and began leaving the gun out in my car just because I was worried about breaking the law.
Mm-hmm. And saw your parents murdered in the wake of that. And now when you hear people talk about confiscating guns, you know, despite the Second Amendment, your reaction is what?
The New World Order.
Anger and disbelief. I've got to tell you, I think Hillary Clinton should lead by example. I think she should disarm her entire security detail and that of her children. You know, let's see what that looks like a year from now. Let's see how well that works out. If guns are the problem, somebody needs to explain to me why we don't see these mass shootings at places where there are thousands of guns in the hands of at least hundreds of law-abiding citizens. I always think of the dreaded gun show. We don't see mass shootings at dreaded gun shows. We don't see mass shootings at NRA conventions. We see mass shootings at places where we have made guns illegal, where people can't protect themselves.
What? So, I mean, obviously, Australia, they conducted this experiment and gun deaths went down. They don't have a Second Amendment there. It's like, that's going to be a problem with her plan
that we have.
However, let me ask you, as somebody who's a gun advocate, what do you see as a solution? Because I think many people are earnestly searching to make some change in something to lower the number of mass
there's
homicides.
always that need to do something. All right, look, to me, this is one of the most simple things in the world. Again, I kind of already said it. These mass shootings occur at places where people are not able to protect themselves.
Gun-free zones.
If I want to rack up a high body bag count, I'm not going to go to that gun show. I'm going to go to a university. I'm going to go to a school. I'm going to go someplace where I can be reasonably assured that I can shoot people like fish in a barrel. I mean, that's dreadful to think that way, but I can't help it. Been there, done that. And I want to know why is Hillary Clinton's child's life worth more than mine? Why does she get to have armed protection for her family, but she wants to take my armed protection away?
You know,
A gun is not a guarantee.
Obviously, she's under higher threat than the average citizen, she and her family, given her status.
Well, is she? I mean, now seriously, with all of the mass shootings that we're seeing and the random killings that we're seeing, is she?
Good question. Susanna, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
All the best. Also tonight, Judge Napolitano is here with what he thinks is the big story ahead of this week's Benghazi hearing. He's next.
It wasn't construction workers went by, they saw it, and they called 911, and they realized this was an actual body.
Do we have footage?
I believe we do.
No footage. It's just a story.
Okay.
Good. I don't really want to see this. It's all good.
Well, police were called over, they reported, and sadly the victim was identified as a 31-year-old female. She was actually running from her attacker. She got caught up on the fence, and then, you know, her attacker took a rock and just beat her with blunt force.
What a terrible story. Why?
And then
Let's
So everybody, if we see dead
you
bodies,
see dead
yeah,
bodies,
call right away.
check them.
See something,
It
say
may,
something.
yeah, it may not be Halloween.
CIA agent working overseas, instead of deleting it as she should and as she's been instructed to, when something like that mistakenly comes to her, she sent it to her friend Sid Blumenthal to his non-secure server.
Who she wasn't even supposed to be working with.
Precisely. She wasn't supposed to be working with him. She certainly wasn't supposed to be sending classified material to him because he lacked the classified security clearance that she had. And when she's asked about this, you just saw in the clip you ran, she laughs. Let me tell you, she's being investigated by the most serious, non-political, sophisticated team of FBI agents in Washington, D.C. The same people that investigated General Petraeus.
What is the
and succeeded
consequence, do you
convicted.
think? What do these people think when they see her laughing like that?
I think they're ginned up to. I think it's a normal human consequence. You're mocking our very serious work. You think this is a laughing matter? We will show you that it is not a laughing matter. She may think she has a little cover, because the President of the United States last week in his own interview said, I think it was just a mistake. Is he undermining his own FBI, which acts independently of him in an investigation like this, when he makes a statement like that?
So your prediction for Thursday?
My prediction for Thursday is some of the questions will be a little silly. Some of the questions will be political speeches. Some will be very serious that she won't be able to answer. And it'll be about what she knew and when she knew and what she did with those emails.
And the judge will be back with us Thursday night after it happens. We'll be right back.
I think I'm much more competent than all of them. When you talk about George Bush, I mean, say what you want, the World Trade Center came down during his time. I would have been much different, I must tell you. Somebody said, well, it wouldn't have been any different. Well, it would have been. I am extremely, extremely tough on illegal immigration. I'm extremely tough on people coming into this country. I believe that if I were running things, I doubt those families would have, I doubt that those people would have been in the country.
Jeb said we were safe during his reign. That wasn't true. And that's the only thing I pointed out. And I'm not blaming anybody, and I'm not blaming George Bush. Although, if you look at his three primary agencies, they hated each other. They weren't talking. It wasn't that they weren't talking by mistake. They hated each other. And a good leader would have made sure they get along and they talk.
And here's part of Governor Bush's response to Donald Trump.
I have grave doubts, to be honest with you, and it's only because of the things he says. It looks as though he's not taking the responsibility, the possibility of being President of the United States really serious. And he changed the laws, he did everything necessary, he united the country, and he kept us safe. And just a tip of the hat to that, and moving on to what the threats are today is what we ought to be focused on. Donald Trump is not a serious candidate as it relates to foreign policy.
Yeah, does that mean that we've had this big issue about whether or not
He's capable of being the commander-in-chief to show that he's capable. It's not just, it's about a strategy. It's about ISIS take out Assad in Syria. That is not in our strategic interest to allow Russia to gain innocence in Syria. This problem is cascading out throughout the region of refugees heading towards Europe. You can't expect the Soviet Union to take out ISIS. That's not this.
I want to ask you as it relates to, I think this is an important question because if we don't learn from the mistakes in the past, I would argue we're doomed to repeat them. And you're right, where literally the Sudanese, and they offered bin Laden on a silver platter. An old friend of mine, Matt Crossan, actually asked Bill Clinton about this issue, and I'm going to play it for you, and here's what he said. If Bill Clinton knew he wanted to commit crimes against America and was offered him and he didn't take them, isn't that in and of itself a legal basis to take the guy? I mean, if we're going to really delve into this issue, that seems to me like an admission.
I think there's two ways to look at Islamic terrorism. One is a threat that has to be taken out as it relates to creating a strategy that calls it a war, or we view it as a law enforcement operation where people have rights. I think the Clinton administration made a mistake of thinking bin Laden had to be viewed from a law enforcement perspective. Similarly, President Obama's policies seem to be focused on that as well. This is a war against Western civilization. And without the United States leadership, this will be a problem for generations to come. And I think we need to be much more forceful, both here to protect the homeland as well as overseas, to create a strategy to unite the world against this grave threat. And I don't believe Donald Trump has the capability of doing that.
You see the backlash emerging now in Europe over the refugee problem from Syria and Iraq.